we're delighted to have Peter give our final concluding address this afternoon for what I think, I've really loved the day. So as I said at the beginning, the great joy of organising an event is you organise the event you want to go to, and I've had a great day. So I hope the rest of you have had a bit of a good day as well. Why this is particularly special to have Peter speak with us is because he was in at the very beginning, at the beginning of one of the programmes that's been mentioned a couple of times today, which is the IGH programme. So it's really nice that he could come today to talk about leadership development, because one of the sparks, if you like, that set off the particular IGH programme was this need to look and think more creatively about helping people learn leadership skills in the NHS, as well as the paper we referenced earlier that Nigel Crisp wrote back in 2007. So it's particularly, as I say, particularly nice that Peter's here with us today. And without more ado, we'll hand the time over to Peter.
Thank you, Fleur. It is absolutely fabulous to be here. It's really interesting. You sparked off when you said that. I don't think I've actually shared this with many people, but the reason we set off the first IGH initiative was because I was acutely conscious of how unvalued junior doctors felt. And this is 9 years ago now. And felt that actually if they felt not valued by the NHS, sure as hell they would be valued in countries where they were not as flush with healthcare services as we were. And it sort of feels a little bit pertinent to today. And the climate that we find ourselves in. This is an enormous privilege, and I am a complete imposter to be speaking today, because although I'm very proud to have been involved a long time ago, all the rest has been led very ably by Fleur and many others in the room. I'm not going to mention everybody else because I'm going to miss somebody out, and that would be completely wrong. But it is also lovely to see Hilary here, because without Hilary keeping me under control at the very start of this, nothing would ever have happened. So it is just fantastic to be here. I'm going to talk about contemporary leadership theory. Now, that might sound a bit of a dry subject, and I tried to persuade Fleur not to have me here today quite a few times, largely because I didn't think I had anything to add. But the more I've got involved in the thinking around some of what I think is quite imaginative thinking around leadership development, the more I've begun to realize that that global health experiences, if I may use that term loosely, are absolutely up at the forefront of leadership development. And a lot of the things which I have been guilty of peddling in the past, I think are infinitely less relevant to the sort of leadership development we want to see as we go forward. So what I hope I'll do is marry a lot of the things that I see in global health with some of that contemporary leadership theory. And if nothing else, as a number of people today said, I hope it'll at least make you think. So title is fairly obvious. The bits in red, and I don't know whether this is going to work or not, because every time I've done this, I've thought there actually needs to be a bit more in red, are the things where I think there's a direct link to what you get out of experiences in global health. The first and very obvious thing, many of you will have seen, if you've heard me speak before, will have seen me use this left-hand slide. This is the work of Michael West, which shows that if you have good team working in your organization, you will have a lower mortality. So leadership is crucially important. There is an evidence base to say why leadership is crucially important. And as all healthcare systems, no matter where you are in the world, face massive challenges, leadership is one of the solutions to those challenges. The document on the right is a rather sobering report which we published last year, which says that the evidence underpinning leadership development is not that great. And this, rather than taking a swipe at people who get involved in leadership development, is saying that we need better information. So to paraphrase Bette Davis, in this particular time in our history, leadership certainly ain't no place for sissies. And the issues that we face are a world which I don't think is well described. It certainly hasn't been well described in any leadership development program that I've been on in the past. And I've called this our developing world, and I'd ask other experts like Marion and Stefan to sort of say whether this actually applies beyond our shores. But the world is now, VUCA I think is a term that was nicked from the military. volatile and uncertain, complex and ambiguous. And if you take those first two, the example I often use, and there are many people who, when we all worked together in South Central SHA, will remember this time. Remember the swine flu epidemic. And do you remember the anxieties we had around swine flu, which wasn't just bad enough though it was, the fact that large numbers of the population might die from swine flu, but actually that large numbers of healthcare personnel might die from swine flu. And how do you run a healthcare system when large numbers of your staff are either sick or dead? And if you take the poignant example of an intensive care unit, how many people have to die in an intensive care unit before you wipe out something that we just take for granted and rely on? So, and the reason that we were so anxious about it was that we had no precedent. We had no idea what the impact of this was going to be. And I guess there are plenty of examples of those outside this country. Complex, I think, is fairly obvious. And ambiguity is something I'll come back to a lot later on. Because again, I think that the experiences that you gain when you're working abroad is that you live in a world which you're not that comfortable with ambiguities, with cultural differences and all the rest of it. There are people who struggle to cope with ambiguity. I don't think that applies to anybody in this room. Looking outside health altogether, study of 1,500 chief execs globally, all deeply anxious at the pace that the world is changing, and even more anxious about the fact that they don't have the skills and the personnel, basically, to cope with that rapidly changing world. And something which I've experienced most of my career, that bottom sentence there, stacks of people wishing we could go back to what they often describe as the glory days. Those people that regard life as long periods of stability, a little bit of turbulence, and then long periods of stability. Well, it hasn't been like that for pretty well all of my career. But, and you know, it's disappointing if that's what you think is going to happen. Now here comes the red. So in the same interview, the same study of a large number of global chief executives, these were some of the challenges that they faced. And I won't ask you on a show of hands, because I think this is pretty self-evident that we understand this world, don't we? But look at those things in red, the interconnectedness of systems and business communities, the interconnectedness of communities that we work with overseas. Dissolution of traditional organisational boundaries. My experience of Sanlaut is that you weren't entirely sure where the Thai border was, never mind the more traditional boundaries that we struggle with between different organisations within this country. New technologies, different values and expectations of generations, but different values and expectations across cultures, and increased globalisation is pretty obvious. Same study described the sorts of skills that we need to cope with this ever-changing world, and I'll leave you to read that. And if time was allowed, I might torture you to see which was the one that they thought was the most important. And I guess it doesn't take Einstein to realise it's actually down at the bottom here. Creativity. How much do we support, teach, train? Can you support, teach, train creativity? I'm not sure. And just to sort of conclude with the sort of the UK bit, we've had endless inquiries. Every time you read one of these sad reports, and I noticed the Morecambe Bay review was published yesterday, or the follow-up to Bill Kirkup's report. Every time we do this, we look at leadership as being a critical issue and the problem. And then we have all these wonderful reports which claim to have the answer. Last year we had 3 national reports that looked at leadership in the NHS. I'm not certain that we've taken notice of any of them. And finally, good old Robert Francis did actually recognise, bless him, that leadership is important. The challenge... sorry, I didn't mean that to sound quite like it. No, actually, I did. So the challenge that we face thinking about leadership development, the first 2 I've covered, the need to recognise the environment's changed and that the skills have changed. But we've got to change the methods that we try. We've relied far too heavily, and this is not just in this country and in this system. This is across the world. There is an issue that people send people off to to a nice hotel somewhere, they do pink and fluffy things, they evaluate it really well because they're living hellish lives. And to do something pink and fluffy for a couple of days in a nice hotel, it's really hard to get a bad evaluation for that. But when you ask these people 3 days later, has that made an impact into how you do your job? Most people will be very honest with you and say it was great, but actually my context is rather different to the one that we were talking about, and it is very different. And the second 2 points, I'm sure, the penultimate 2 points, I'm sure you've read by now, and a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is around horizontal and vertical leadership development, which I'll explain in a second. And if I could remember the order of the slides, it might even be the next one. Oh, yes, it is. So horizontal leadership development, and it took me an awful lot longer than it'll take you to grasp this concept, I'm slightly embarrassed to say, but horizontal leadership development says, this is my job title, I go on a leadership development program, and it will make me better at the leadership challenges and the management challenges of delivering that particular job. And that's fine, and we need that, and it's really important. So when I extol the virtues of vertical leadership development, I'm not rubbishing horizontal leadership development. I'm just saying that if that's all we get, then all you get is what's happened to me all my career is I've got better and better and better, I think, at the job I was doing. And then somebody else has said, come and do this job. And you think, oh my God, and then there's an 18-month learning curve, which is not great for the system. And what would have been much better if somebody had given me the opportunities to realize what it needed to step up into the next rung. And the important thing about vertical leadership development, if you go back to the VUCA slide, is vertical leadership development helps you cope with that highly complex and highly ambiguous world that we all occupy. And I was delighted. I'm a great hoarder. My wife tells me off for never throwing anything away. Thus it is with all the talks I've ever given, and I've now got gigabyte after gigabyte of talks. So I went back. This talk was from 2007. Stefan will probably recognize where that is. And this was a quote from one of the very early clinical fellows. I've started in my new consultant post, and I'm already learning to apply some of those skills that I've obtained. They've been very useful in dealing with certain situations I encounter every day. Well, my experience of becoming a consultant is that nothing I did in my training actually helped me with the holding a knife and a drill and things. That, yeah, I could do that stuff. But the tricky stuff, the leadership stuff, nothing really prepared me for that. I think Global Health Fellowships do prepare you for that. I'm slightly nervous with Colin sitting up there, and the last time I gave this, I was really anxious until I noticed he wasn't in the room, but he is today. But I'm going to talk a little bit about developmental psychology. So what do we mean? What happens to us as we develop vertically? And this is work taken from a guy called Keegan, and I think there's a slightly better study I'm going to quote in just a couple of minutes. He doesn't talk about levels 1 and 2 because those apparently apply to children, and I've yet to find out what levels 1 and 2 are. But level 3 is when we're starting to realize that working in teams is important, sort of the socialized mind. But the people at this stage of their development see life as very binary. It's very black and it's very white, and their opinions are very colored by the latest posh person that told them something that they thought sounded sort of half reasonable. And people will move their position, but it isn't their own position. Whereas when you move to the next level, the self-authoring mind, people are starting to define their own moral compass. They're starting to write their own version of events. And then the final bit goes back to the point that I've talked about before. So it's level 4 plus, for me, ambiguity. So that ability to hold opposing views, or when you're fairly clear of what your own thoughts are and your own thought processes, and then somebody comes along at you from left field with something completely different. And I think we saw it on one of the last slides today. Somebody comes at you completely left field, and actually, rather than being completely thrown, the ability to hold both and recognize actually there may well be something in what somebody else believes that actually changes the way that you think. So those are the sort of 3 levels, and I suspect, unless you're living in a very unique bubble, that you can think of people that you work with that are all those 3 levels. And I'll show you some statistics around that in a minute. Oh yes, I'll show them some statistics about that now. As I say, the ability to cope with the world that we live in increases as you move up the scale. But alarmingly, if you look across at global leaders, I'd say this is outside health predominantly, only 7% hit that top spot. So we aren't alone in having our concerns around leadership, and 15% are at that very basic level. This is a study which I thought was more helpful. Rook and Torbert talk about this theory, this thing about action logic, and if you want to know anything about action logic, Colin will explain it all to you afterwards. But it's not so much the sort of the descriptors of people that we have tended to use a lot in the past, but rather it's how they interpret their surroundings and react in real circumstances, in real life, when their power and safety is challenged. The challenge is that very few leaders try to understand their own action logic, and that's probably because, like me, they didn't know it existed until 10 minutes ago. And fewer still have explored the possibilities of changing it, but you can change your action logic, and you can move through the different levels. And the other thing that Torbert and Rook pointed out is that people, if you start to understand your own action logic, then you can actually propel yourself through the different levels. So what levels am I talking about? And I won't have time to go into all of these because the slides I'm going to show you are really detailed. So just take a quick sort of squint at the high level stuff. But starts off with opportunist, achiever in the middle, and then you get individualist, strategist, and alchemist at the top. And I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. But I just wanted to show you this before you started to look at some of the other stuff, and just see where the percentages lie in this. And you can probably guess where I'm going. 55% at those bottom three highly successful levels. These levels of leadership are associated with below average corporate performance. And that's where more than half of our global leaders sit. Achievers, the top three, as you will imagine, are much more organizationally effective. So what do I mean by these various levels? And these would be slightly amusing if they weren't so tragic. But if you look at opportunities, I hope you don't meet many of these, but I bet you have met some. Egocentric, manipulative. They see people as objects or competitors who are simply out for themselves, and they regard their bad behavior as legitimate in the cut and thrust of an eye for an eye world. There's a sector which lies a little east of here, which I suspect is stuff full of this lot. I won't suggest which one that is. 5%. Experts, I think this is probably more relevant to an audience which has many clinicians in it. But for experts, knowledge is power. And they experts pride themselves in having huge amounts of power, huge amounts of knowledge, being extremely well read and so forth. And it's easy to be disparaging about all this, and I'm sure many of you can think of lots and lots and lots of people in this category. In the study, it was 38%, as you'll see at the top there. But they are fantastic contributors because actually they strive for excellence, and you would want your clinician to be highly knowledgeable. However, you might not want these people to be managing you because they're so cocksure that their view of the world is right, that actually they become really, really tricky to deal with. And emotional intelligence, I love this, is neither desired nor appreciated. People have a wonderful turn of phrase sometimes, don't they? And there's loads of people down here. And the consultants actually, in this context, were not healthcare consultants as we would know them. Achievers, this is just really people starting to recognize the value of other people, more emotional intelligence and more interest in team. And I'm going to skip over this very quickly because time doesn't allow to go into it in that much detail. And a couple of really, I think the top one's quite interesting, that, and I suspect that some of you have met this, and I think, Marion, your toilet cleaner comment is probably, this epitomizes that, doesn't it, really? Expert subordinates find the achiever leader hard to take because he cannot deny the reality of the achiever's success, even though he feels superior. And I've had a lot of experiences in my career of going off and doing this meaningless and worthless thing called management or leadership, and people saying, you know, actually being an ologist is the only thing that matters on the planet. And then the bottom one, I thought this was only in medicine that you heard this, but the eternal lament of engineers, etc., whose expert success has saddled them with the managerial duties only to estrange them from the world they love. And finally, I've skipped right to the top. And as some of you heard me say before, these people are so bloody perfect and so nice, you can't even hate them. But if you look at some of the things that you see on that list, they can deal with many situations at a time. I love this one, can talk to people at the very top of the tree, but also can talk to the people, the very important people who aren't at the top of the tree. Often engaged doing lots and lots of different things. And here, live by high moral standards, typically charismatic, very aware, etc., etc. So you can sort of see, and that's only 1%. And I guess most of us would think actually it'd be quite a good objective to strive for. So I'm just going to finish on what I hope are just a few practical things. So, and this is the work of a guy called Nick Petrie from the Center for Creative Leadership in Greensboro, North Carolina. You might think by what I'm about to say that Peter Hockey's never in the country, but Peter first introduced me to CCL from having sort of popped in to visit them on one of his many globe-trotting trips. And they're a fascinating organisation because they, probably above any other organisation in the world, have actually looked at the evidence underpinning leadership and leadership development. And I've put the most important one at the bottom there, but I think this is really important. Some of the comments I heard you talk about earlier on about what do you do as fellows going back into what can be quite a hostile world. I mean, I run the National Medical Directors Clinical Fellowship Scheme for Bruce Keogh, and we have exactly the same challenges and the same issues. And I must pay tribute to Simon here because I think the culture that Simon creates in the Wessex Deanery, and is Michael still around? But you know, actually those positive cultures that can be created actually do start to help actually people returning. But if you want to develop your leadership, take control of yourself, because actually you are all different. You all have different personal attributes, different personal ambitions, and all the rest of it. So if you want to better yourself, you know probably better than anybody, if you have any insight, and I'm sure you all have, where you fall short, where you would like to develop more, and then go and get the clever people to help you actually do that, rather than just all be shoehorned into some rather amorphous thing. So I would urge you really to think about your own trajectory, your own leadership development, and work on that. I think this has been said quite a few times today. It's important in every sphere. Life is too complicated for the sort of single heroic leader charging from the front. Leadership, I mean, I don't like the term followership now. I think teams are teams of leaders. And the challenge within those teams of leaders is when you pass the baton on to somebody who's better at doing it than you are, and when you take it back again when it needs you to be doing that. So a greater focus on collective versus individual leadership. And we need a much greater focus on innovation and leadership methods than we've had hitherto. And I'm just now going to talk just a little bit, just a couple of slides on how you might think about vertical leadership development. And if any of you don't see any relationship between this and global health, then I've failed miserably. So this is taking Nick Petrie's work. He described 3 simple things. I like things in threes, even when it's Peter Hockey, myself, and Marion. Do you want me to stop now? So Nick Petrie talks about 3 different types of experience that we need to think about as we grow our leadership development vertically. First is heat experiences, and I think that's fairly obvious. So heat experiences is stepping out of your comfort zone. There can be nothing more poignant than stepping out of a very, very cosy, engineered National Health Service, such as the one we have, into sitting in a hut with Stefan. And I think, I mean, Stefan said this to me many times, that business about opening your mind to a completely different way of doing things. And something else about this is that a lot of the interventions that we do around leadership development are really, and you can understand why, but they're very short-lived. Actually, to truly develop, then actually that exposure you get where you are, I'm going to use the word trapped, but I don't mean it to sound in a negative way, but where you're in an environment where you can't actually disappear easily, and it's a very alien environment to the one that you're used to, is a fantastic way of you reflecting on yourself, and we've seen that time and time again in the quotes that people come back with. So heat experience is the first thing. Colliding perspectives, and sorry, these are quite American, not Canadian, Stefan. Colliding perspectives is the ability to talk to people who have a different view of the world to you and help you to hone and develop your own views, and brings into the sort of the whole polarity thinking and the whole ambiguity piece. And then finally, the elevated sense making, and again I think that this works well, I think, with the mentoring that goes on. But as Fleur was mentioning to me beforehand, I think one of the fabulous things about the IGH program is the fact that previous fellows mentor other fellows, and it's really interesting when you look at Nick Petree's work, because what he says is it's fine, you know, you get somebody very senior. I know Mick's done a lot of mentoring. You get somebody very senior that mentors you. Actually, we don't know what it's like being you. And for people like me, it's 30, 40 years since I was at the same level. So the mentoring that you offer to each other is, again, absolutely contemporary in the way that we should be pushing things, because actually you've made sense of this in the right context and very recently. So I don't think there's anything complicated in that, but I think that global health fellowships press every one of those buttons. And just, I'll skip that. Very quickly, if you don't have all three, if you just have chucked in the deep end and lots of other ideas, the temptation is to revert back to your way of seeing the world and your way of doing things. If you take out the colliding perspectives, it's very difficult to move forward, because you may be making more sense of it, but you're making sense of it by looking through your own lens. And then finally, if you take out the heat experience, then it's sort of a bit of an academic exercise. So I hope that was of interest. Just before, I've got one last slide I wanted to just dwell on. And I hope it's mind-blowingly simple. And I was saying to Fleur, I'd quite like to be giving this talk in 2 or 3 weeks, because as I've been sort of thinking about it and preparing it, the more I've thought about global health fellowships, the more I've thought just how incredibly valuable they are. And I don't know, I'm interested to chat to Caroline afterwards, just how we can take that sort of experience, which is quite an extreme view, and how we can take the learning from that and actually build that into people that don't actually have the opportunity or the desire or the will to go and do what you've done. So before my last slide, I'd just like to congratulate you all. Seeing that show of hands and seeing what Fleur and colleagues have created is truly spectacular. And as I say, I feel very privileged to stand here today. And the last thing is, I thought was really apposite as he moves on from MJP. It was just a few words about Stefan, because without Stefan, our partnership would never have happened. And there were some interesting experiences, some of the conversations, which we'll tell you over a drink, right at the beginning of that, about some of the more interesting parts of partnership. But Stefan, you, as well as your faith in the NHS, I think you believed in us, a bunch of very rookie amateurs coming to face you. And as I went down this list, I just look at the way Stefan has reinvented himself, his amazing capacity to deal with situations at multiple levels. He was negotiating peace with Thailand at one stage, as well as doing everything else. Just peace between a couple of warring countries, I mean, it's the sort of thing one does really on a Friday afternoon. This always impressed me, and I think, and it's lovely to see so many of your colleagues from Cambodia here today, but sort of the love that they show you, which is clearly well earned, and your ability to communicate with them. But when we first went out, we met the Minister of Health in Cambodia, And it was clear that the respect that people held for you was very high. And I'm going to stop embarrassing you in a second, because as I look down this list, it is nauseating how many of these you tick. And this one here, hugely charismatic in your own way, highly aware, and this ability that you have to live by the highest moral standards, I feel very, very envious. Deep respect, so thank you very much. Jenny.
Hi, Felicity, Academic F2. Thanks very much for your talk. And it's really exciting, I think, to be a young doctor in this time when there are vertical leadership development opportunities like the IGH and CFS schemes. I just wanted to ask your thoughts about ensuring the sustainability and scalability of programs such as these, because they're only so far having a relatively small number of junior doctors every year, and also expanding to other healthcare professionals.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's something we struggle with on Bruce Keogh's scheme, is how big do you let it get before actually it ceases to be a fairly exclusive scheme, and actually before we make Simon's job completely impossible by the fact you guys are all out doing fabulous things, and actually there's nobody back at home looking after the NHS. So I think it's difficult to put a hard figure on that. I think the numbers aren't big enough at the moment. I think the opportunities could be broadened. So I think at one extreme, go out and spend 6 months in Cambodia. But I think that we should find ways of actually giving people that experience which doesn't actually take you out of the system for 6 months. And we were chatting, Katrina and I were chatting about a talk I gave at the RSM a while back, of saying that we do need to move away from this cottage industry that is global health, bring things much together more. And I think you could set up a really fascinating system if there was a specialty called global health, where there would be supervision out in various places, and people could go out and you could even have, why could you not be dual accredited in global health and somology? So it's not a precise answer to your question, but I think we need to see more of it. And of course, we have to be really careful, because there's stacks of people who don't want to do it, and that's fine too. And actually, we couldn't cope if everybody wanted to do it. But just where the borderline is between too many and too few, I don't know is the short answer.
And can I just add something to the answer as well? As is a multi-professional programme, actually. So we do have nurses, midwives, and all the professions beginning with a P that are even more invisible. So it is a multi-professional programme, which I think adds to its value. And we have hospital managers as well. So again, so it's not just people with a clinical background. Just to reassure you, it isn't just for, for junior doctors.
Doesn't physiotherapy begin with an F?
Maybe where you live.
Remedial gymnast, I think they used to be called.
I'm not quite that old, but thank you. Thank you for thinking of me. Yeah. We've got time for one last question. And Caroline's got the microphone, so it looks like it's going to be Caroline.
Oh, and that means I can do a thank you at the end. So, Peter, thank you for that. I was really struck. We've talked a lot about global health today. We've had a mini conversation about alumni and how we could use it. And I'm also struck about how we can use the alumni, the global health learning, for the system challenge that we've got in the NHS today, and what your views would be on that.
I think you've said it, absolutely. And if I can pick up the alumnus thing, we've set up now an alumnus scheme for the other fellowship scheme I've been involved in. And I think it was a point, I think Nigel made the point earlier on, is that individually we're all incredibly weak. Collectively, we're not. And I think you don't need to do much. You need to come together in this, but you need to do a bit more. But that doesn't need to be a huge amount for you to start to become an expert group, and then to start to have your voice heard. And there will be people among you who will be prepared to lead in those sorts of situations and so forth. So I think the power of an alumnus scheme is potentially huge to drive through some of those things that we've talked about today. And if it's driven by the people in the know, the people who've done it, it's a lot more powerful than actually senior people sort of almost patronisingly saying, I think this would be a jolly good idea.
Thank you very much. Thank you. But we would like to give out 2 prizes. So it's been really difficult, but we've got a prize for a poster and we've got a prize for a 3-minute oral presentation. The judges were delighted to be asked before they looked at the posters and heard the presentations, and then found them all so good that they found their task very, very difficult. But they have chosen a person to receive the prize, which is a most splendid book token. So I really hope that you'll find a book that you'll like to read, and a very nice card and a certificate and a thing to put in the book when you buy it. So we've thought of everything. So first of all, I'd like to invite Ben Sims to come up.
So on behalf of Marion, Tony and myself, this was a very difficult decision. I started scoring at 9 out of 10, which was a big mistake. So I then had to make up scores between 9 and 10, ignoring the rest of them. Really impressed with the quality of the presentation, seriously. And what a good format. How much can be conveyed in 3 minutes. Really brilliant. So after much deliberation, we have a winner, and the winner is Helen Casey. And just to quote Helen's lovely words, a lot of small changes can have a big impact.
Thank you. Great. And then we've got a prize for a poster, and that's going to be given out by Stefan Bogner, who was the chair of that panel that reviewed all the 20 posters.
Thank you. First, I have to say, you know how we were, you had the 3-minute presentation? Well, Mike and Andy, we had basically about a minute to review each poster. I felt like we were on a Google or Yahoo search engine. Lovely to give us that time. Please, I must say that. I must state that. So we were quickly trying to assess the posters within a very limited amount of time, doing our Google research or Yahoo. And so about a minute per poster, we looked at something that was clean, crisp, to the point, visually attractive, reader-friendly. All this is going through our mind. And I'm sorry, Mike is here, and I don't know where Andy is. So we do have a winner, and I have to say, there is a lot of information out there. And when we were reading, trying to read within that minute, we realized that there's a lot of great work in the field. And of course, I'm familiar with some of the work, and I'm like, wow, impressive. But unfortunately, with the minute that Fleur gave us, we had to choose something that was, again, that visually we can grasp it, hold it, read it, and move on. So the winner for this poster presentation is Hannah Spires and Michael Barton. I don't know if they're here.